Privilege tonight to stand to discuss the value of recognizing human dignity. As I do so, let me add to an earlier discussion that reflects on giving our children human dignity. Isn't it amazing? Our children have suffered in the course of the most recent history depredation of wealth, and so they have been ensconced in poverty. They've been hungry. They've been without a good education. This is children in America. We can speak about children around the world. They have had little access to broadband, technology, and they've suffered in their housing provisions, if you will. So I'm very proud to just start out by, again, applauding the American Rescue Act and also the life-changing impact of the child tax credit. I don't think we can do that enough. And children of color have been at the front of the line, being able to help with food and child care, diapers, health care, clothing, taxes. Poor and working and middle-class families are able to receive the same amount. And you'll see where I'm going on this, because we don't do this in anger. We don't do this because we're mad. We do this because it is righting the wrong, as one of my colleagues said. This will provide $250 per month per child and $300 per month for every young child. That means children under 5. All families in my district will be able to feel more secure. Let me run through these numbers because they are stunning. The 18th Congressional District in Houston, Texas, Mr. Speaker, 91.7% of children in my district will gain from expanded and improved child tax credit. I know that because I have been immersed in child care education events. We've been at a church, we've been at my federal building, we've been up and down on the radio, we have been everywhere we could be to ensure that we did it with humor, with seriousness, with compassion, with being out in the street corners, along with trying to encourage people to get vaccinated. We've been saying, get ready for the child tax credit. President Biden, the Democratic Congress, worked so hard on. 91.7% of the children will gain from my district. That's 202,800 children. I have schools in my district that are 100% at risk, and they eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There is no shame to helping children, but behind those children are parents who are suffering. These dollars will help these parents have dignity, their children have dignity, and their children have resources. The average benefit for 56,700 households in my district, Houston, I hope you're listening, $3,500. And if you have not filed your taxes in the 2019 year, you can immediately get help from my office at 713-655-0050 or our IRS tax advocacy team, also in my building of 1919 Smith in Houston, Texas. Don't miss the opportunity for your own human dignity. It is not a handout, it is a hand up. The expanded and improved child tax credit lifts 21,800 children in my district out of poverty. Because of the larger benefit for the youngest, 8,400 kids under the age of 6 are raised out of poverty. That is expanded across America, where millions of children face a new day. Families with children in poverty will receive $5,300 on average, and they're getting some 6,500 children in my district out of deep poverty. We know now that we're engaged in the appropriations process. Thank you, Chairwoman DeLauro and all of the appropriators. We know how important it is if you're going to do something in life. This year, 2021, in the aftermath of COVID-19, this is a year to do it with the appropriations bill. This is a year to do it. Again, my theme, a sense of dignity. And where does that take me now? Well, one moment I must deviate for a moment, Mr. Speaker. Just indicate that I think that the Biden-Harris team has brought to America a sense of compassion. It has turned anger and ugly words into reaching out to people where they are. That could mean people that oppose them. but they reach out to them where they are, and they reach them with a sense of understanding and acceptance that they must cast leadership for all of America, even if people disagree with them. So my good friend was here on the floor. I'm sorry that he has left. I want to emphasize that Vice President Kamala Harris is doing an excellent job on some very tough issues. She's leading on voting rights, has been meeting with any number of persons. I want to remind America that Texas Democratic state representatives who've had some medical mishaps here, or medical circumstances of COVID-19, no one is immune, are still here fighting so that we can have voting rights. She has met with all of them. She is deeply engaged in making sure that we work together as a Congress to get voting rights done. Along with the Congressional Black Caucus, Chairwoman Beatty, and all of us as members who are standing ready. So she's doing an excellent job. And I will tell you, living on the border myself, living in Texas, in the region, having gone to the border over and over again, she is doing a job that should be done that others are not doing, getting into the weeds and understanding what the president's path should be as we go forward on immigration reform. She has been to the Northern Triangle. That is the heart of where the issues start, and they are working to discern how they can best stop the massive flow of migrants, immigrants who are in fear of their lives living in the countries that they're living in. These are tough issues, and I just want to say thank you, Vice President Kamala Harris, because some people misunderstand and think that it is just an easy thing to do. My word from Texas on her trip was excellent, and that people were receptive to her intellect, her compassion, and her willingness to get the job done. And the job will be done. So as I say that, I indicated this would be a night about human rights. And so I want to give you a little education about legislation that we're so pleased. Can you imagine H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals, having near 200 sponsors, co-sponsors, of individuals who have come from many parts of the country? And so I'm speaking to my colleagues who happen to be Republicans, and I want to give them the opportunity to realize just what this bill is. I heard someone say restoration. I heard someone say repair, and they're right. And my good friend, the Honorable Barbara Lee, we're working in tandem together. Working in tandem on HRES 19, which is reconciliation and restoration. And then the bill, HR 40, legislation to create a commission that would study effectively slavery and as well then develop reparation proposals. Again, restoration, repair. Let us remove ourselves from any sort of shackle on the question of reparations. Let us be understanding of someone else's pain, someone else's history that is, in fact, American history. So I hold up this bill because I said I'd do show and tell, H.R. 40. Look at the pile of members here as original co-sponsors, and they have been coming on, and I want to just say thank you to my friends and colleagues who have thoughtfully felt the need to say, how do we heal America's systemic racism, and how do we heal institutional racism? How do we not ignore or what is in fact truth? Now, I think most of you know I could not stand here without saying thank you to the 415 members of Congress who voted along with the United States Senate on Juneteenth. Do you realize that Juneteenth is the first time America has acknowledged the history of slavery. 1865, those of us west of the Mississippi just got the word from the Union soldiers with General Granger that we were free by General Order Number 3. Juneteenth is a commemoration of that, and I want everyone to know that, frankly, 47 states have already been celebrating in their own way Juneteenth. After 38 years, we have a new federal holiday called Juneteenth, which gives America and little school children the opportunity to ask their dad or their teacher, what is Juneteenth? That was holding people in bondage, but it was setting them free. After the bloodiest war, brothers against brothers, the Civil War, where Abraham Lincoln so emotionally indicated a house divided cannot stand. But General Granger came, and Sam Collins held a magnificent celebration on June 19th in Houston, in Galveston, in that region where I represent. And the mural was unveiled by a magnificent artistic team led by Reginald Adams out of Third Ward, Texas, which is Houston, which is where my congressional district is. And it told the story of the freedom of these slaves. And we repeated General Order Number 3, which says equality of rights. But the biggest thing it said, the slaves are free. And that we insist upon equality of rights. That's all that H.R. 40 is about, my friends. Are we to deny equality of rights? That was in General Order Number 3. That's what the president, unfortunately being assassinated, President Abraham Lincoln, sent General Granger down to read to the slaves that had worked and been beaten for 2.5 more years. It is important that we not ignore what slavery was all about. This is the whelped and beaten back and scarred back of a slave. Let us be clear, bondage, we are the only group of Americans that have been held in bondage in this nation, and we've been held or were held in bondage longer than this country has been a nation. 246 years we were held in bondage, and we only celebrated our 245th birthday. So we are here to be able to very briefly run you through a brief history. Let me do this. Let me first of all talk about the words of Gary Abernathy, who proudly says that he is a conservative. And Mr. Speaker, what is my time remaining, please?
The gentlelady has 14 minutes remaining.
I appreciate it. Only to make sure that I can now flow with the concept of the time. But the headline reads, "Why I Support Reparations and All Conservatives Should." I know my friends are listening here on the other side. Gary Abernathy. And I'll take some excerpts from this. He acknowledges that he is a conservative. And I can venture to say that his credentials can be documented. But he says, in spite of the bill that I've offered has an apology, he takes note of that. He even indicates that he may not be that enthusiastic about that. But he says, in fact, it could be argued that the idea fits within the conservative philosophy, meaning that the notion of reparations is worth discussing because he says, in fact, it could be argued that the idea fits the conservative philosophy. He goes on to say, but it is undeniable that white people have been disproportionately benefited from both the labor and the legacy of slavery, and crucially will continue to do so for generations to come. None of this is said with anger. It is only setting forth facts. When slavery was abolished after a bloody civil war, African Americans were dispersed into a world that was overtly hostile to them. Reconstruction efforts were bitterly resisted by most Southern whites, and attempts to educate and employ former slaves happened only in fits and starts. Remember a group of people in the millions who simply were set free. Freedom is precious. We cannot deny how precious freedom was, how sweet it was. But they were given nothing. nothing to start their lives, and they came into the hostility of people who really didn't want them to be free. That was the bulk of the South and many parts of the North. The government even reneged on its 40 acres and a mule pledge after slavery. Prejudice and indifference continued to fuel the social and economic disparities. Be reminded of the wept back of this black man, this slave. And there were wept backs of women and children. They lived through this for no fault of their own. They worked and toiled the fields. They made cotton king. They built the economic engine of this nation. They created the transatlantic slave trade. They sent millions of dollars from the South to the Wall Street banks, and we built America. They built this place of which I stand, the United States Capitol, with their bare hands, and they built the White House. What else could they have built? And so when slavery was abolished, there was silence. It has been represented that there is a thousand that even affirmative action would never close the economic gap. Black, even middle-class blacks, have no paper assets to speak of. They may be salaried, but they're only a few months away from poverty in many instances if they lose their jobs. And many times the ravages of discrimination and segregation are intertwined in the law, and they may lose their jobs. And so this conservative author believes in reparations. And he believes that this can be done with a fair amount of dollars, but there is more to it, as you will hear me say, because it's not about money. He concludes by saying it is a tenet of conservatism that a level playing field is all we should guarantee, but that's meaningless if one team starts with an insurmountable lead before the play even begins. I think LBJ said, if you want to tell people about a fair race, meaning a running race, and one fella or lady has shackles around their ankles, and the whistle blows, get ready, go, it is not a fair race, because one runner is freed and has all of the elements of freedom and the ability to do great things, and one is running with leg irons on. So as we look at how we can, as a nation and a community, come together, I don't know how many times I want to raise the question that we are not doing this in anger. H.R. 40, first introduced by John Conyers, is an international concept. It just means repair. It means doing the right thing, healing, dealing with injustices. It will not be painful. But let me tell you why this legislation is not painful, because it is a study that will give us a roadmap. And it will be done with academicians and those who are appointed by government leaders, and they will be balanced and they will be responsible and thorough. And so, why do we think we need it? Let me submit into the record, and Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent, Speaker, to submit the letter from the article from Gary Abernathy, Washington Post, contributing columnist.
Without objection.
And I asked to put in the Washington Post article, UN Rights Chief, reparations needed for people facing racism. Ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
This report came from the United Nations because reparations is a universal concept of repair, repairing, and human rights. And so this report, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, this is big stuff, offers a sweeping look at the roots of centuries of mistreatment faced by Africans and people of African descent, notably from the transatlantic slave trade. Does that sound familiar? Back and forth across the United States, across the ocean. It seeks a transformative approach to address its continued impact today. And so in its report, it says, I am calling on all states to stop denying and start dismantling racism, to end impunity and build trust, to listen to the voices of people of African descent, and to confront past legacies and deliver redress. This is what this report has said, the United Nations. It goes on to say reparations should not only be equated to financial compensation. This is what I've been saying. I say that when I go on the floor and ask for my colleagues to support it. Thank goodness almost 200 said, we understand it, we get it. I'm looking for my Republican friends to join us. Adding that it should include restitution, rehabilitation, discrimination, rehabilitation, acknowledgement of injustices, apologies, memorialization, education reforms, guarantees that such injustices will not happen again. Does that sound unfair? We cannot find a single example of a state that has fully reckoned with the past or comprehensively accounted for the impacts of the lives of people of African descent. This individual who was head of a unit on non-discrimination said, our message, therefore, is that this situation is untenable. This is a report from the UN. A main part of the problem is that many people believe the misconceptions that the abolition of slavery, the end of the transatlantic trade and colonization have removed the racially discriminatory structures built by these practices. Absolutely wrong. The report found that this is not true. Also denouncing an idea among some associating blackness with criminality. That has gone on in many places around the world, including the United States. This report also decried the dehumanization of people of African descent that was rooted in false social constructions of race in the past to justify enslavement, racial stereotypes, harmful practices, as well as tolerance for racial discrimination, equality, and violence. Do we realize that that hurts all of our children? Children that are white and non-white are hurt by the definitions of color and Africans and people of African descent. We face inequalities, meaning those of African descent, and stark social, economic, and political marginalization. In many countries, the report said, including unfair access to education, healthcare, jobs, housing, and clean water. What the Commission could do is to give peace and understanding of the very fact of what would be a positive response to this question of discrimination. I want to add some real scientific evidence that I'm not here on the floor complaining. I am giving an opportunity, along with infrastructure bill, along with the budget reconciliation, I'm on the budget committee, to be able, along with voting rights, to, after 30-some years, when this bill was first introduced in 1989, after the Japanese received reparations in 1988, of which we supported, and thank you to the Japanese American Association, they are strong supporters of H.R. 40. They got reparations for their false and unfair internment in the 1940s during World War II. We celebrated it, we worked with them, and helped them construct that, those who were in Congress at that time. And we filed John Conyers this bill shortly after 1989, and I am honored to have been given this challenge and this opportunity by him upon his retirement. I will not let the nation down. I say the nation, because a definitive study is worthy. If I might show you that the idea of reparations is to suggest a continued systemic impact that is going on even in this moment. This is an article as part of the Harvard Medical School's continuing coverage of medicine, and you would not believe it. Civil rights activists have long called for monetary reparations. This report opens up. This is a scientific vetted report from the Harvard University Medical School. It's titled Anti-Racist Epidemiology. Research suggests reparations for slavery could have reduced COVID-19 infections and death in the United States. This was published online on February 9th. What it does is it is to estimate the impact of structural inequities between black and white individuals. The researchers set out to capture the effect of reparation payments on black-white wealth gap, my friend, in the state of Louisiana. This is an important report. The disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on racial minorities, black individuals in particular, have been well documented. Black people get COVID-19 at a rate nearly 1.5 times higher than that of white people, are hospitalized at a rate nearly 4 times higher, and are 3 times as likely to die from the disease as it first started, according to the latest estimates from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. And so the greatest disease burden among black people have caused tremendous loss of life and unspeakable suffering across these already vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. Notably, these effects have also spilled over and are driving transmission rates of virus in overall population. And so they did their study in many places, but I'll read a portion of the study. Examined the initial period of the outbreak before the infection control measures were implemented. So many differences in infection rates between populations at the time would have been driven mainly by differences in the social structures. Very quickly, Louisiana has a population heavily segregated by race, with black people having higher levels of overcrowded housing and working on jobs that are more likely to expose them. And they found that if reparations had been given, they would have done better. I conclude, Mr. Speaker,
Ladies, time
by just saying,
expired.
you see a picture of the Tulsa race riot. That is why I stand here today to say that Tulsa, Greenwood needs reparation. H.R. 40 needs to pass. Why don't we do it together?
The
Why don't we
gentlelady's
move
time
forward?
has expired.
And I thank the gentleman for his courtesies. I yield back.